Alright guys, so today we're going to check out the Westone Mach 30 IEMs. Now Westone basically at this point has two series of IEMs. They have the Mach series and they have the Pro X. Now the Pro X is more for like on stage performances and more so like a studio environment, where the Mach series I think is the one that's geared more towards consumers, so maybe even like sound engineers, and you could use these in studio environments as well. But the Mach series come in a bunch of different options, and basically each option changes the amount of drivers that they have. So they have the Mach 10 all the way up to the Mach 80. Now we're going to check out the Mach 30, which is using 3 balanced armature drivers. So they're using a balanced armature driver for bass, which is kind of odd, especially out of all the IEMs that I've tested. I haven't really seen a balanced armature driver have to handle bass, but it's also a balanced armature driver for mids and also one for your treble. So everything is going to be separated. It's not all being handled by one single driver, but we'll talk about how that performs once we get to the sound. But let's go ahead and start with the price of these, because this is not a cheap pair of IEMs, but again, I think this is more for like professional use and more of a pro environment. So it's more a tool than it is just a casual listening IEM, which it can be used for. These come in at $499, although right now on Amazon, I believe they're $450. So crossing that $400 mark for a pair of IEMs is going to kind of turn off a lot of just casual users. But audiophiles or anybody that's really into audio gear, you know that you could spend thousands of dollars on a pair of IEMs. And I think that's, again, a little bit more what these are geared towards. Now these are also, on top of using the 3 balanced armature drivers, they're using a 3-way passive crossover, and this is basically how it outputs its sound and to make sure that everything does not interfere with itself. But inside the box, it comes with a really nice case. It actually kind of looks like a Pelican case that people use for like their camera gear, so it's a nice hard case. It also comes with a little drawstring pouch for you to keep that case in, which is a lot to keep up with if you are going to use these on the go. But as far as ear tips, they give you 5 sets of silicone ear tips and also 5 sets of foam ear tips. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of foam ear tips, but I think it's great that they're giving you so many options in both styles. So if you prefer foam ear tips, there's a lot of options. If you prefer silicone ear tips, there's a lot of option as well. Now, when it comes to the cable, there's not a whole lot of options. You just get the cable that's included, and it has to be one of the thinnest cables I've ever seen. It reminds me a lot of the cables that used to come with, you know, the cheap headphones that came with a Walkman or a CD player. It looks very, very thin and flimsy, but that's actually by design. This is a Linum BAX or BAX cable, and it's not using a very common connector either. It's not using that 2-pin connector. It's not using the MMCX connector. It's using a T2 connection. So most people are not going to have, you know, spare T2 cables laying around. So this is the cable you're really going to have to get used to using, unless you can find some different ones online. But it's a high-end reference silver-plated copper cable. Again, by design, it's made to be thin. And when you mix this with the fact that the IEMs have a polycarbonate housing, which also makes them very light, it's one of those pairs, like basically once you put them in your ear and mixing it with this cable, you can easily just forget that they're there. It's lightweight, it does not move. In fact, the first pair of ear tips that I put on here fit me perfectly, so I didn't have to go around and play around to get like the right fit. But obviously make sure that you do that. Make sure that you get one that gives you a good seal, or you're really gonna miss out on what these are capable of. But speaking of that, these do have an impedance level of 91 ohms. It's a little bit harder to drive than some of these other Chi-Fi IEMs that I've been testing lately. The frequency response is 20 hertz to 18 kilohertz. I do want to point out again, you know, you can use these plugged straight into a device like a phone, a tablet, a laptop, or anything like that. And I didn't really have much of an issue getting volume out of them. But to really, again, draw out the lows, the mids, and the highs, I am going to recommend using an amp. But I am also going to say that this isn't one of those that I think really requires an amp. I felt like just plugging these straight into my laptop, I was able to get a really good representation of what I think these were supposed to sound like. Now, the sound signature overall, I do want to point out that I do not think they're trying to compete with basically a Harman curve. They're not trying to give you that typical sound signature that's in a lot of earbuds and a lot of more of the mainstream IEMs that usually cost less. This one's tuned to be a little closer to reference style. Now, this isn't a flat response IEM. I felt like there was a warmer sound to these overall. I did feel like the bass had a nice punch to them, but it's not bloated. It's not over exaggerated. The mids, I was a huge fan of. I loved listening to these for different vocalists. I felt like it just brought out a lot in both male and female vocalists. Acoustic tracks just sounded really good on this pair. And the treble, I was also pleased with. And that's because it is a little bit bright. It's not harsh or anything like that, but I am a huge fan of bright treble. And I felt like if I went from metal to pop to hip hop or anything like that, there was a lot of detail in my music, and I can hear, a lot of subtle things, and like the crash of the cymbals never got buried in the mix, especially if I'm even listening to metal where there's a lot going on. So it really felt like there was some good separation between the lows, the mids, and the highs. Initially, I was a little disappointed because of the low end. It's just, again, not that subwoofer or bloated type bass, which I am used to. So if you are used to that, you are going to feel like these are lacking. But after listening to these for a while, and I don't really think it's because anything's breaking in, I think it's just my ears adjusting to these, I've actually become quite a fan of the bass that these have. It's just a lot tighter, it feels a lot more accurate, and it still does have some looseness to it to give you that slight, vibration. It's just not that overwhelming subwoofer shake your head type of bass. Now, when it comes to the sound stage and the sound imaging, this was another area I was very happy with these. It made me feel like I was in a large room. It didn't give me that like concert hall or reverb or echo type feel to my sound, which I do not like. I do like the fact that it tightens it up enough where it doesn't feel like it's trying to replicate being in a large environment, and being able to tell where different sounds are coming from. This pair had no issues with. And honestly, grading this across all genres, I was just a huge fan of how it sounded with each one. I would give it an 8 basically across the board. But I'm also going to say that I'm not grading this based off main consumers. I think a lot of people that are used to Harman curved type IEMs or earbuds is going to be a little disappointed because this one's not as dynamic, it's not in your face, and it's not trying to be. It's not what that is intended for. It's made for more critical listening, or maybe in a studio environment where you need to hear things more on a somewhat neutral level. So I think the Mach 30s, and at least what I think they are intended for, is doing a very good job. Westone Audio is not really known for having like cheap products, but they've been in the business for a long time. They're more on the professional side more than they are the consumer side. And I think for professionals, this is an excellent listening or audio tool to have in your box. I mean, I could see sitting in front of, a mixing board and just listening to everything with these and picking apart different things, which again is what I think they're intended for. But guys, that wraps up my video on the Westone Audio Mach 30 IEMs. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Thank you so much for checking out all the other videos. And as always, make sure to stay tuned for more.